Okay, so we'll start with Rodan. It had been many, many years since I've seen this. I believe I saw this when I was a child. I think it was sort of in the rotation, just not as heavily. I was more familiar with Rodan in the future films, so it was interesting to go back to the original Rodan. And I was thinking, okay, the flying scenes have always been a little wonky. You got a guy in a suit on the ground, sometimes where he's kind of standing still. The flying scene, sometimes he's flying around like a jet fighter, which they even allude to in the film. Sometimes he's doing some flapping, and it's usually pretty clumsy and awkward looking. There's even some scenes where he's apparently being suspended by strings, wires, if you will, and they had some problems working it, so he's like, he's real wonky. So that's kind of what I remembered. I was like, how are they going to sustain an hour-and-a-half movie? Well, I really forgot a lot about this movie. So the movie starts with people digging mines. Now I have to say, I started to watch this in English, and then I was like kind of curious. So I was, for about 10 minutes, I had two different versions going at the same time. I found the original Japanese version subbed in English versus the English. In the English version, you would see characters talking, and they had somebody doing narration, kind of giving you like a summary of the plot. Whereas in the Japanese version, the characters actually talk to each other and move the story along. I also noticed that in the American version, they took scenes and then they reversed them. They mixed them up. There's a scene where two miners get into a fight, and then after that, everyone calms down and they go into the mine, and they show like a scene of people going down into the mine, and people are coming out and people are going in. And in the American version, they show that first, and then they show the fight. They did that a few times. There's some cave-in scenes using some models that happen halfway through the movie that they took and they put in towards the beginning of the American one. Overall, I don't think it really changed the film that much. So anyway, there's these miners, and they basically awaken these creatures, and I had forgotten about this totally, that are like insect larva type things. I think they call them megaluna or something like that. There's a scientific name, and they awaken them, and then these things come up, and they actually come into people's houses, and they're pretty cool. I mean, they did a pretty good job on this. That segment alone could have been a pretty decent monster movie along the lines of It Conquered the World or Them. I'm not saying it would have been as good as either one of those two films, but creatures from the atomic age that are not super giant size. That was pretty good. So later, and that often happens in these kaiju movies. Even in Godzilla -1, you had the deep sea fish make an appearance, and that sort of indicated that Godzilla was on the way. That often happens where they'll give you a little hint of a small creature, and then there's the big creature. The only thing is, these insect larvae, giant insect larvae, had nothing to do with Rodan. It's not like the early form of Rodan, so it was almost like, it was still pretty cool. I mean, because once Rodan makes an appearance, there's not a whole lot to do with the effects and the plot. There's some planes getting knocked out of the sky. He's flying around like a rocket. He buries himself in a mountain, like in a volcano. So seeing King of the Monsters, that's the origin of Rodan. He kind of chills out in volcanoes. Later, and I forgot this totally, there's a second Rodan, so there's a male and a female, and the military attacks, and there's scene after scene after scene after scene of rockets being fired. A lot of rockets. Goodness. And then eventually the one Rodan is basically trapped in the lava and can't get out, and then the other one looks like it's going to fly away, but then decides to go out with his mate. And that's kind of the end, and I'm not even remembering some details, and I only saw it a few days ago. I watched a whole lot of movies when I was sick, so some of these are not going to be fresh in my mind, super fresh. But it was pretty good, I have to say. I'm glad I went back and rewatched it. I did enjoy it. Not quite as Mothra, but we'll get to that in a moment. yeah, again, there's not a lot they can do with Rodan as far as action scenes. You know, he swoops down, you have close-ups of him pecking things, and then different flying scenes. Oh, and he, of course, he makes the wind. He does use his wings to generate a lot of wind, so we do get a lot of that. Not 100%, as you can tell. Okay, so next, Rodan. Next, Rodan, it's actually... Okay, and now let's just talk about Mothra real quick. I gotta tell you, just like Rodan, I hadn't seen this film in years. I typically remembered Mothra with the other monsters in later films. And there you see a guy getting tangled up in a carnivorous plant, which is a cool little extra touch since Mothra doesn't come in until a ways into the movie. And there, of course, are the twin fairies. By the way, the story, this is not an original Toho idea. There was a story called The Luminous Fairies and Mothra. So you wonder where the idea of the fairies came from, the twin fairies. It came from a writer, and Toho just thought it would be a good story to appeal to more of a female audience. And there they are in their cute little carriage. Anyway, I hadn't seen this in years. I forgot tons of it. This was a lot of fun. I have to say, objectively, despite the strangeness, which the strangeness is part of the charm, the weird effects and the colors and the twin fairies, it is one of the most fun of the earlier Toho films. Objectively, one of the best films. It really is pretty good. I enjoyed the heck out of it, and I've enjoyed seeing Mothra and the fairies in future films. I'm way ahead. I'm behind on my reviews because when I was sick, I was just watching kaiju movies constantly. Anyway, basically, the plot is pretty simple. There's an expedition to this infant island, yet another mysterious island. I love all the islands: Skull Island, Monster Island, Infant Island. And there's a native population there. And there's these twin fairies, and the natives are worshiping this egg, and some unscrupulous business types, I think they're supposed to be from like a separate country from Japan, they come in and steal the egg and start charging admission for it. And they're really fun villains, because there's the big boss, and then he's got a really slimy assistant. They're both real slimy, to be quite honest with you. But everything blows up in their faces at the end, and it's pretty funny. But they'll do anything. They'll kidnap the fairies to keep the money train coming in. Eventually, the egg hatches. Turns out there's two. And, Mothra is in caterpillar form first. And then it turns out there's two. Just like in Rodan, which is something I forgot. And then so at one point you have one caterpillar and one Mothra, okay, that hatches. So it's pretty cool. There's lots of damage, lots of missiles being fired. But I really like what the humans in this story had to do. They weren't going up against aliens this time. They were just trying to sort of help the fairies set things right, and rescue the fairies from these unscrupulous bad guys, and just stop the mayhem and restore things to the way they were before, when everything was peaceful. And so as far as the cast goes, there's one guy I wanted to mention, Furanki Sakai. Okay, he's got a pretty impressive resume of films, all kinds of different films. He plays this reporter. The first time you see him, you're like, oh, he's going to be like the comic relief guy. He's actually been one of my favorite characters in any of the films. There's some action scenes, sort of, where he has to jump into action. And Big Boy had some moves. He moved pretty good. And he turned out to be funny and compassionate. And I wish they kind of would continue. A lot of times they just traded a reporter for a reporter. One movie had a scientist, next movie has a different scientist. I wish they had some more continuity with some of these characters, because a lot of the human characters in this were pretty good. Now, as far as the twin fairies, they were played by Imi and Yumi Ito, who were actually a musical group called the Peanuts. And, I'm not sure exactly how popular they were, but they had albums, and, You can find videos of them on YouTube. They were even on the Ed Sullivan Show in the United States. And I've gotten up to the point where a different set of twins has played the fairies. And I have to say, I do like so far, I do like the original Ito twins the best. They're really cute. They do this thing in this film where like one of them will begin a sentence, will say a few words, then the other one will continue the sentence, and then they finish the sentence in unison. It's kind of funny the way they do that. In the subsequent films, they don't do that as much. Usually they just talk in unison. But it's just a kind of a weird, trippy, fun kaiju movie. I enjoyed the heck out of it. Highly recommend it. If you haven't seen Mothra in years, go check it out. And that is my review of both Rodan and Mothra. They were both really good. I'm glad I went back to visit both of them. I do prefer Mothra over Rodan as far as a movie. As far as a kaiju, I guess I still prefer Mothra over Rodan, but I've always had a soft spot for Rodan. I think he's pretty cool. Effects-wise, I think they can do a little more with Mothra. I don't know. When he flaps his wings, and it's not as goofy as when Rodan does it. You know. And of course, he does, as a caterpillar, he does shoot silk. He uses silk as a weapon. So that is something that we'll be talking about in future reviews. Yeah, that's fun. What a fun movie. I really enjoyed the heck out of this. All right, guys, there you go. How long has it been since you've seen either one of these two films, and which is your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. Later.